All right. I can't. Yeah, I'm lost.
Me unmute. All right, everybody. Sorry about that. It might look a little different than last time. I don't know why it's not doing a side by side situation. Oh, there we go. Got it. Okay. So, everybody, what is today? I'm like kind of scatterbrained today. It's August 15th, 2020. We are part two of our ghost stories with Argyle Goolsby, which he is a phenomenal artist, as those that know him. Talented musician, composer, writes music. Like he does pretty much everything, especially in the music scene. So we have Steve back to finish our ghost stories because the last time it went way too fast, way too fast. So welcome, Steve. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah,
Although a lot of people were saying we should do this that during Halloween, like close to Halloween, when it gets all weird and freaky.
yeah. When the veil is the thinnest, that would be the best time.
Exactly. It really is. So I did say, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, we'll probably do it again, just, around that time. But everybody that I spoke to, especially Dave, was like, oh my God, I want it more. I want it more. So, so I figured, we'll put kind of a little bit closer to each other and then kind of go from there. So
I like.
last we left off, we were in Germany, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And
One of the many.
And you were asking about like Dave's stories and stuff. Don't mind my hair. I got the like gray hair ghost streak going on here, right? You see this?
I like it. Yeah, it's like
Right? But it's only there, so depending on how my hair flows, depends on if you see it. Like if I go this way, you don't see it at all.
like next.
You're very
Yeah,
little.
like when her hair turns gray.
Yeah, it's like whoop, there it is. And it's funny because Dave said he liked it. He's like, it reminds him of like the Poltergeist movies when the mom's hair went streak white,
Oh yeah.
from that. So he's like, it fits your persona pretty well.
I just had to stuff everything under a toboggan or a beanie. I mean, it's just like that. It's been months since I've had. Well, not that I would have had a haircut anyway. Like full disclosure, but um, I probably it wouldn't have got as crazy as it is. I don't think.
I get it, and safety first, right? So, we tend to want to keep ourselves protected, but yet we think our hairstylists should put themselves at risk just to do our hairs.
Right. I haven't had a professional haircut in 4 years, and that's the truth. Since I moved up to Connecticut, I used to see my friend Laura down in Tennessee. I would go see her like maybe once every 3 months to get everything kind of like wrangled in. Um, but when I moved up here, I was like, look, can you just tell me how to cut my hair? And she like diagrammed it out for me, drew me pictures on like a little piece of paper, and I'm like looking at it like, okay, and I'm like holding my hair up with it, like cutting it. So far so good. You
Okay,
know,
so that's something we've learned about you is that you cut your own hair. I don't cut my
like
hair. Although I did have Dave trim it, like probably about 2 weeks ago. He was really nervous to do it, but I was just like, it's touching my butt. It's getting caught in my shorts, like cut it
this is
just at my hips. Just snip it. It's curls. It doesn't matter.
yeah.
Never, straight. He reluctantly did it for me, thank God. He went a little shorter than I was expecting, but that's okay because it's still pretty long.
He's a good man.
He really is. He's actually going to get his haircut right now. That they opened up. He had to cancel the last session because I was sick and we weren't sure if it was COVID, which it turned out negative. But until we knew for sure, we were both quarantined to the house. So he's getting his haircut. So he's going to come back nice and fresh and happy, a new man.
I like it.
Well, it was funny because when we last left off, you wondered about some of the stories that Dave had over in Germany.
Mhm.
And I touch base mostly on the big experiences. Dave tends to have experiences by other people. His energy is very protective, and he puts up a lot of energy walls that block spiritual activity, which is nice. And it gives me peace. It was the first time meeting him and his family that I wasn't bombarded by spirits the moment I met them. And so he kind of was keeping them like a safe haven for me. So I was allowed to be around him without issues. Now, obviously, since he lives here, it's a little different. It took about 2 months before the spirits started making noises and knocking through his barriers. But it was funny because when he was in Germany, not only the experience that you had, then he was completely creeped out and wanted to leave that space. But then that one bar I was telling you that he was taking pictures and sending me, it was because he was so weirded out in certain places, especially behind stage. And he was like, I don't know what it is. I just don't feel comfortable. And I was like, well, take some pictures for me. And so he did. And it was weird because what I was seeing in the crowd, and I touched base of this real quickly last session, was what I was seeing in the crowd was spirit people just randomly within the crowd. And one of the photos, it he had taken it just as it turned. And so the face that I saw was like not human, which was interesting. And as soon as I saw it, I then started texting him and I'm like, "Do you see?" And I was trying to describe it to him. He's like, "No, I don't see that in the picture, but I could see what was there." So then it was a matter of me, putting a bubble around them from a distance, which I've done to you from a distance. I'm like, "That's okay, I got you. I'll cover you up."
Yeah,
Especially when you go home. Home for you is, yeah, that's
yeah.
there.
It's like I bring all my friends with me. It's like more than me.
Exactly. And when I say home, not home where you call home now, but a home where you grew up, when you go back home,
Oh, that place,
hometown.
that place is a mess. That's a spiritual mess down there. It really is. And I've talked to you about that before, um, especially the area that I grew up in. It's a place called Hell's Bottom. That's technically the town, but the last name Hell.
Oh,
Uh,
God, that says
but
it all.
it's Hell's Bottom. It's technically like a part of a small community called Falls Mills. Um, and there was a battle there in the Civil War. It was called the Incursion of the Falls Mill. There used to be a mill there. I mean, that's what the town was. It was a mill. It operated the town through hydropower. And when I say town, it was like 8 buildings. Um, but during the Civil War, there was like a surprise attack by the Confederates on some Union troops that were moving through the area. And I mean, they still have like a commemorative plaque there now, and sometimes they'll do reenactments. Which I mean, I don't know like what you can reenact from this, but point being is there's a lot of not only like Civil War vestiges there, but a lot of Native American stuff too. I think we talked about. Did we talk about Lake Shawnee?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we
So
did.
anyway, but no, I know exactly what you're saying. And when I was a kid, I grew up. A lot of people will be surprised to find these sorts of things out, or they usually are. I mean, just being a good Southern kid like I was raised in church. Do you know what I mean? I went to a non-denominational church. From the time I was like born until I was probably about like 16 or 17 when everybody started like giving me shit for having a mohawk, and I was like, I'm done. Like I don't need this. Um, but there's some stuff going on at that place, and I've told you about that. A lot of my issues came from that place in terms of, like me discovering that there were forces at play outside of, just like the human realm, which is weird because it's at a church, right? So,
Well, and that's a good point to make because a lot of people think, well, it's church, it should be good. And this is something that for people like us, because those of you obviously who know Ghouls or Steve through music know him as this persona, of this wonderful persona that produces amazing music. And yet, the Steve in him is also very spiritually connected. He sees things, he feels things, tends to be, certain situations because your mind is always go, 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 and to truly communicate, you have to shift into right brain, right? So it's more the creative side. So when you're in your element of playing music and just kind of being in that creative space, that's when your abilities will crank up, but then there's a slight distraction because of what you're doing, right? So for those that don't know, Steve, He's very gifted and he's very spiritually connected. And
I'm trying.
yeah, no, you
Trying to
absolutely
understand it more.
are. And and that's another good point, because if you don't have somebody to talk to, how do you know what's happening? You need to know somebody who knows what's happening, right?
Well, it's funny because I was living in Massachusetts for a brief period of time back in like about 10 years ago, actually. Um, and as I was there, I was sharing a place, like a roommate who was working at a tattoo shop, and the whole purpose in me being in Massachusetts at the time was I was going to be apprenticing under this guy. It didn't work out, but while I was there, um, I was working with another band outside of like my own thing at the time, which was just Blitzkid. Is a band called 1476, and they lived out more on the coast. They were kind of out around Salem in that whole area. Actually, they're from Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is next to Salem, but different. So at the time, I would go. I'd take the train every like Monday up there, to the North Station or whatever it is in Boston, and I would just take a bunch of connecting trains to them, and then we would rehearse. I was up there once around my birthday, so it was 10 years ago, and the singer Rob he's like, look, while we're here, I want to get you a birthday gift, and I was like, you don't have to do that. He's like, no, 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 like there's a person here. It's Salem, so it's super kind of like kitschy.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, but behind all this kitsch, there really is, some accredited people that, do these sorts of like readings and things like that. So he took me to this shop, and I went to see, a card reader, like a tarot card reader, uh, whom I've never seen before. Like I've never seen a card reader, much less this one. And I was like, yeah, that's cool, man. Let's do it. Right. So we go in there, and, we sat down, and I'll never forget, we just kept going through the cards and everything. And the guy was trying to get a reading on me. And he was like, "You're really hard to read." And I was like, intentionally, I think, probably putting up a wall because I never had it happen, and I'm skeptical by nature, so I want to see like if I don't want to give this guy any cues because it's a lot of. I feel like sometimes some people, like the charlatans or whatever, it's just learning how to read people. It's just like the FBI or the CIA. It's all about body language and little things like that. So I'm trying not to give too much information. But I did find one interesting thing that he said, because a lot of it it was kind of non-specific, but then there was one part where he was looking at a card and he said, "You've been followed by something. You're not from here." And I'm like, "No," which is probably obvious. And I'm like, "No." He's like, "Well, there's definitely some form of spirit, or I can't tell if it's a spirit or entity or whatever you want to call it." He goes, "And I'm not really sure that it's negative either, but it's definitely something that is attached in a very like unhealthy or an unbalanced way in terms of like myself and whatever it is." And that tends to be something that I've noticed, like everywhere I've gone, there's been some form of like that activity of one degree or another. Even when I was living in Massachusetts, at the house I lived in it was an old Quaker house. It was over 100 years old, and there was always some weird things happening there. Kind of just nothing that was like you would see though. It was like suddenly the car keys would be in the middle of the floor, and like, why are they there? Or like the one of the light bulbs would be unscrewed. Weird things like that. So there was always that kind of thing happening. But I just wanted to bring that up. I just found that interesting that talking about home, and then what this guy was saying, like at the card reader place. So
Yeah, and we've had many conversations about that, because that church you were speaking of, we tend to think of churches as being safe places to be, but they're one of the worst places for anybody with abilities to go to, because churches, people bring all of their anguish and stress and suffering, to give it up, right? Give it up to God, right? Because that's what church, tends to have a common theme of. And no matter the religion, right? Give it to God. God will allow you to have what you're looking for if you just give in, right? You just submit to them. And so the problem is everybody's coming to church with their gunk, their anger, their sadness, their stress, their anxiety, whatever, and they're bringing it to church. And then your deacon, your priest, your shaman, whatever the title is, whatever. Um, they're praying, right? And they're praying for people. They're praying for, to have everybody at peace. They're not praying for the grounds. They're not clearing the gunk. They're not clearing it, right?
Well, that's where it all begins too, at least for this specific place, is the area. I mean, the whole area, just when you go down there, it's not just that place. Not to interrupt, I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're fine.
Just there's kind of a segue into more issues in that area that I can kind of
terrible
go at some point. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that was pretty much it. And I know that church, there's something in that basement that's very dark. And that's where I feel like they have like the kids be, the daycare, the children's services tend to be in this functioning basement area. And it is a dark entity that's down there. So churches, they're not safe. They're not safe unless the people...
I get chills talking about it. Look.
Yeah, goosebumps. Yeah, exactly. Because you've experienced it. I can astral project and I can pick up on that information from a distance where you've experienced it. And I know we've had a few conversations in the past, and I don't necessarily remember them, but at least not the full detail, because I don't mean in disrespect with that. But when I start communicating, I kind of forget about things. But it was nasty, and it did leave a little bit of an imprint on you. And it would affect you from a self-worth perspective. That are you okay? And, is things bad for you because of choices you're making and the music you play, and you know what I mean? And no, it's not. But this thing is. And I believe we removed it a while ago, and I don't think you've had any issues since then.
Well, it's funny because again, like, for me, like, we talked about this, like, I'm not so much, I can kind of, sometimes I'll sense, what I mean? Like a change in energy, like a change, do you know what I mean? Like as if the temperature changes, not necessarily the temperature, but I'm saying like, it's just very like a gradual, just like, non-specific, just awareness. Like, so it's not really honed in, but I think like where I'm the most, I think, tuned into is, like where I just know is with areas. Like there are certain places, do you know what I mean? Like that's where, and that's something that I think out of the whole part and parcel of this, that I think that I mean, I don't want to say like I have an understanding, but it's just the most intrinsic. Like I can, for example, I can just be going into an area, like exploring or something, like driving down a road, and then I'm just like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like suddenly it's just like really, and that's not uncommon. I know people feel that way. But it's just really strong. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that's the strongest grasp I have on any of this is areas, like locations. The Hudson Valley up here where I'm at is really, really bad for that. I mean, there are times where, we'll just be driving through parts of like Connecticut, because, I'm right on the state line of Connecticut and New York. So, I can be, like I can be in Massachusetts in, not even, an hour and 45 minutes north, or I can be in New York State in 10 minutes. But the second I cross over, like into a lot of the Hudson Valley or going south, towards like, your guys' way, depending on where I'm at, like Sleepy Hollow, that area, like that's not so much. Like I definitely do get a feeling there, but it's not. It's more like positive, honestly. It's like it's a good feeling. I think I've had enough pleasant experiences to override just like the general like I'm just driving through and things are weird here feeling. But I get that a lot, and going back to where I'm from, it's a lot of places like that, and that area specifically is really really strong for that. That that battle that I was telling you about, it, that incursion or whatever, happened right there. Where all where that church is. On that, like the plaque, you can see the plaque from the church, and you can see the mill from the church. Um, but the segue I was going to tell you about is I had a friend who I didn't know growing up. He moved there like, when we were like 16 years old. When I was 16 years old, he was a few years younger than me, but he was like into skateboarding and all the same stuff I was into. And I actually, the first time I ever met the kid was I was watching him skateboard in the church parking lot while I was at church, and I was just like, oh man, I want to be out there doing that. Because he lived right next to it, across the street. Like the parking lot was connected to his house. So long story short, we ended up kind of like hanging out, becoming friends. And I would go over to his house, you know what I mean, and I would like give him a mohawk and stuff like that. I was like the elder punk rock statesman of my town. It was like, hey, come give me a mohawk. I was like, all right. So
Converting people.
yeah, so like I was teaching him how to skate, a little bit, like some tricks he wanted to know. So I go over his house, and like I said, we would chill and just like kick it in that parking lot or go elsewhere. But his house was a mess. Let me tell you what. Like I remember sitting there and just being like, bro, what's wrong with your house? Like there's this place like is really, really like I felt bad there. And he's like, oh, it's haunted. It's haunted as hell. And I was like, really? And he wasn't like very sensitive to stuff. He was just kind of like at the time he was a younger kid, just like
yeah,
like
it's
Black
doing
Flag and
it.
yeah. He's not really into. He found it interesting that I was into that stuff, but
Yeah.
he was like, oh yeah, dude. He goes, it happens all the time. He goes, this thing's like harasses my family. I'm like, well, I definitely feel it. And they eventually moved out of the house because of it. And directly across the street from him, okay, was the rectory for the church. That's where the preacher lived.
Okay.
And I can remember being 9 years old, because I was about 9, sitting there, and the preacher was just kind of being distracted or whatever. And he was like, all right, look, I know I'm being distracted, but something's weighing on my mind, and like I really want to talk to you guys about it, but like I don't really know how to broach the topic. Because keep in mind, this is a room full of Christians and church people, and I just let me precurse by saying like they were cool. It wasn't like fervent like hyper religious people who were like zealots and like we're gonna warriors for Christ. It was just like Bible study type folks. It was real laid back, older people more than anything. But he was like, I had an experience last night at the house. He's like, and like I don't know what happened. He goes, I was sitting up in bed, my back to the bed, like against the wall. My wife Peggy was next to me. He goes, I was preparing this sermon. And he's like, and I was just sitting there, and he goes, and out of the blue, this mist was above my head. And I watched this mist go above my head, out of the wall, and turn into a person. Like literally, it turned into a corporal form.
Uh-huh.
He said he saw the feet, the bottom of the feet as they passed over him, the bottom of the feet in this mist. Like, and it just floated. He said completely motionless across the room, through the wall, into the bathroom, like into the next room. And like, I don't know what happened. He's like, and it's hard for me to get up here and talk about the Holy Ghost and the Spirit and all that stuff, and then talk about these things. He goes, because I know it's going to make a lot of you uncomfortable, but he's like, I don't know what to make of it. And like they discussed it for a while. It was crazy.
Yeah.
He ended up staying there for a couple more years, but like some more people came along after him. I don't recall anyone saying oh, this happened to me, but I just remember being like young and just being like remembering that, because that wasn't something I think anyone really like in that situation would expect from like a minister or whatever, like in the middle of like a church group saying something like that. So
Yeah. When you have
if you think,
profound experiences, it's like you have to talk it out a little too, because then it's like, you know, I feel like I'm crazy. You know what I mean? And it's funny because I'm glad that you mentioned your friend's house, because in the beginning I kept wanting to say to you, which house was a church, because that house is terrible because it was a church. But as soon as you start talking about your friends being connected to the church by property, the driveway, I was like, oh, okay, that's what it is. And it's that whole ground, there's a lot of suffering, not just, the embattlement that you had mentioned, but, and the Native Americans that are everywhere. And I know that's part of that whole, like you said, like some of it is just information. You could just guess it.
Yeah.
But um but there was actually a lot of deaths by drowning there. I'm seeing like close to 30 or 40 people had drowned somewhere
Well,
there from like an overflow of an embankment or like a river dam that broke or something. And I'm
so
like 1800s timeline is when it happened. Yeah, there's your goosebumps.
yeah, that's how I know. I don't want to cut you off, but like,
That's
there's a place called the Falls Mills Dam directly, not even a quarter of a mile away from it, that they built, and my mother grew up there, on the hill above it with my grandfather and her sisters and brother when they were kids. And there is a dam there. I mean, they built it more or less because they wanted to. There was the old fall and the old mill which got torn down, but they still wanted to like use the area, harness the river, and then make a dam and then use it as they needed. So the dam was created, and there has been I never told you this. It's never come up, but my brother used to go fishing at this place all the time, and my brother was just like very just like kind of like loved to hunt and fish and just like very loud and just kind of like,
outdoorsy.
yeah, he was a gentle person, but he was just very loud and very boisterous and just very like I'm going hunting, woo, and all that stuff. And he came back one day. They had turned that dam into like a fishing club. And, you would just pay like this is how lax it was. You would just show up and start fishing, and then somebody would drive around and just be like, "Hey, can I have $2, please?" And I go, "Yeah." You give them $2, you fish all day. But then they would give you like a pass as well, so you could just show the card. He ended up knowing at one point the guy who was in charge of going around taking up money, like it was somebody he went to school with, and he's like, "Jason, come here, man. I gotta show you something." And my brother's like, "Okay." And he showed him a Polaroid, and I will never forget this. This was he gave it to my brother. He to like because my brother was like, "I gotta show my brother, and I gotta show my other friends. I'll bring it back to you." It was a Polaroid, and the guy was just taking photos because he had Polaroid film apparently, and he was just like, "I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I'll take pictures of the dam." And out on the water, it was terrifying. It was like The Grudge. It was a girl in a white gown, like like this, and like it wasn't. I'm holding it. You know what I mean? I'm holding it. It's not altered. It's not.
It's a Polaroid too. You can't alter that.
You can't fuck Polaroid, man. You can't go into a Polaroid and draw on it, or
No.
you can't. And it was clearly that place. And my brother's like, "Dude, look at this." And I was just like, "Holy hell, man!" And like, so it's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but that could very well be something that you're like talking about, like what you're feeling, like this could be one of the people that were. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. No, as soon as you said it, it was just like one of the 30 to 40, like it's just one of the, because, they were sleeping. It was like the middle of the night, so they weren't prepared to get out of flooding water's ways, and next thing you know, you're rushing in. And anybody that's experienced a rush like that of water knows how difficult it can be to get out of it, so there's a lot of that too. Like it's interesting because I didn't realize that the town's name was that. And I know you've told it to me before, but I don't think it ever sunk in, But the more that I connect to it, the more that I listen to you and I connect your energy, because that's how I'm connecting to it, is your energy's tied to it. So I can kind of like ride your energy wavelength to that town. And just what I see and experience all there, it's like people have a hard life for no reason. There's no reason
Absolutely.
to have a hard life there, and yet they do. And it's just because the ground is just so blood soaked that it can't. Nothing. Nobody alive should really be there if they ever want to prosper.
Well, it's like the Pet Cemetery. It was like the ground sour. I kind of feel that way, and I feel, I'm torn because there's so much beauty there in natural form. You know what I mean? Like in the natural world. But there are just pockets. Like when I go back, even when I get to certain areas, like I keep doing this and showing you. That's one of my indicators. Like even just talking about, there's certain places where I'll go through there, and it's not even that I've had anything specifically happen. It's just that feeling. It's just that feeling of like being, like a kid going to the dentist or something. You're like, oh man,
Yeah.
you just got to get through this spot as fast as possible. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, there was another thing too, which is crazy. When I was about like, I guess it was about like 10 years old. The only industry down in this little specific place where I grew up, because the falls were long gone. That was again 1800s and whatnot. The mill. There was a place. It was a food packaging company, and they're not there anymore. But they were just it was a very, very big warehouse, and I could see it from my house. There was my house. I lived on the main road, and there was a huge field on the other side, which led to a river, and then on this river was this food packaging plant. And next to that was a place that we called the dye ponds. And I didn't understand why we called it the dye ponds at the time, but what it was back in the 30s or 40s, there used to be a dye plant there. So they were manufacturing all sorts of dye. And this is pre-EPA. Clearly there's not like any like regulations going on. It's right on the river.
It's a dye pond.
And they had these big concrete vats out behind it, where I guess they would either, I don't know what they did back there, but by the time I grew up, it was just full of water and like frogs and fish. So people would go back there and fish and catch frogs, and we would play back there all the time. You know what I mean? Because it was just like Wild Kingdom. I mean, that's where I spent all my time, was just in the woods, in caves, in the mountains, like that. That's just where I was. So like that's why I feel very like tied to the area. Like I feel very like I feel like there's a very positive aspect to it, but there's just like a malaise to it, that I really started noticing as I got older. And now that when I do go back in that area, it's really hard, just because like I'm divided. Part of me is like, oh, it's really cool to be here, but the other part of me is like just really anxious to get out. You know what I mean? But I remember my grandfather telling me stories, and my dad, for that matter. My dad, he was pretty hardcore. He didn't have a car, right? So when he started dating my mom, he would follow the railroad tracks to her house, and she lived 3 miles away. So he would walk 3 miles, generally every day, to her place. He would see her, and then he would, go back. And this was up by where I was telling you, like above the dam. So, he would walk the tracks by the river, which the same river that the mill was at by this church is the same river that I told you, like, is across the street from my house. Across the field, there's that river. There's a train track that follows the entire thing.
Yeah.
And he told me that one time, and he's not a very like ghost guy. He's not like very like, oh, ghosts. But he told me one time that he was crossing one of the bridges, which I find interesting, because I find places like bridges, like edges of forest, places that aren't either one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I think like in old Celtic times and Druidic stuff, they would say like the nexus or the plexus, like the time in between times is what it's called, where it's neither day, it's neither night, it's neither land, it's neither water, it's neither space or ground. It's both. And I guess like the veil or the portals are thinner in these areas. So it goes. And not to get diverged, but when you see in Ireland, like those cairns, those big rocks, like I guess those are supposed to kind of like indicate where these places are. I found it interesting that it was on a bridge, but he said that there was an old man. He said, I'll never forget it. I came around this one bend of the tracks around these bluffs, where it's just a very long stretch of train tracks, where it's just like that classic, if you drew like train tracks to a perspective, it just went forever. And he said at the very end of it, he could see like a figure, and it was kind of getting towards the evening, getting kind of late. And he said as he got closer and closer, he could see that it was an old man, and he had a really, really long white beard that hung down, like, like Johnny Appleseed is what he said, like down to his like belt line. Bibbed overalls. He smelled like manure, like he like cow manure. He had a bunch of manure on his shoes, and he had a big floppy hat, and his hat was down. And he had a cane resting on his lap. And he said that my dad was like, when I got near him, my hair just stood up, like, and my dad was no like sissy, you know what I mean? My dad was pretty rough and tumble dude. My dad used to wear pink socks on purpose just so people would make fun of him, so you could beat him up.
Fight.
like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So he saw this guy, and then he's like, as I passed him, he goes, what am I going to do, man? I'm not going to, not pass the guy. I got to go home.
Uh-huh.
But he felt like an aversion to like speaking at all. And he said the entire time I passed him, I thought I was going to just like collapse. He's like, I was so scared. And like to hear my dad say that, he's like, so I got past him, and it just felt like, like I was just like icy chills. And as I turned around, he was gone. So, and again, that's all in that.
Yeah. And that's interesting because, with what I do, it's very rare that I'll experience something that will affect me that way, and nowadays. But there has been situations. A friend of mine's daughter, who is like 2, 3-ish, they live in an apartment, and the lady next to them is super old. I've never met her, obviously, but when I told them what was happening, super old, labeled schizophrenic from the time she was young. And 99% of the time, somebody labeled schizophrenic or bipolar, even ADHD, they're still communicating. But yet the medical community doesn't understand it. So she's on all this medication. She has been her whole life. Her apartment is a cesspool of tons of spirits. And what's happening is it's coming through their daughter's wall into her space. So she won't go in there at night at all. And so they talked to me about it, and I went over. When I tell you, I went into the apartment, and I was like, okay, I'm good. I could feel her room. I knew it was going to be bad, but yet I get to the point where it's the hallway, and I either go into her room, the bathroom, or their bedroom. And I was just like, yeah, I'm going to go this way first. I'm going to go to their room first. I'm going to deal with her room last. And when I say it was literally walking into like thick putty, like that's what it felt like. Her room, when I stepped in, was like a brick wall in my face of energy. And it took my breath away. Like I had to pause, step out of the room, and re-prepare myself just to enter into the space. And I pushed everything back, and I did what I had to do, but it's so strong, it's breaking through, so I have to do some more things for them. But it's intense when you come across energy like that. And I've had it where it mostly takes my breath away at this point. I used to be terrified. But for others, they may not feel or experience what I am, so they're kind of living through me in some ways, So off of what your dad saw, and this is another thing of like Dave seeping through me. One time we were driving out of Sedona back towards Phoenix, Arizona to fly back home because I had to go for my pre-practicum, and we also went to Sedona. Dave had a course with John, so we did a couple different things, right? And we were leaving, and we were coming back. We're driving down like a big highway, like kind of like 95 but bigger, so like 4 lanes on both sides. And we're stuck in a little bit of traffic, but we're doing like 45 miles an hour instead of 80, right? Which I think was the speed limit.
That sounds like Interstate 81.
It might be. That sounds familiar. So we're driving. Dave's driving. I'm on the passenger side, and I'm just kind of looking ahead, and I'm looking around because that's what I do. And we're in traffic doing like 45 miles an hour, with plenty of traffic. We're like 1 over from the right side, right? And we come to this bridge, and I see this female. And when I describe her, she would remind me of like the 70s style looking female, you know, which is kind of what you would see in Sedona anyway. She had long, dirty blonde hair. She had like the triangle top cut, you know, where it triangles comes down and then ties in the back. So like her shoulders and her back was exposed, but her chest wasn't. Wearing like, you know, just like some jeans, you know. And I see her. So if you think of like a bridge, I see her off to the side, you know, just under the bridge, you know, like on the shoulder of it. And it's a little ways away, you know, maybe like 15 feet, 20 feet. And we're doing 45 miles an hour, so we're going fast.
Yeah.
So I see her, and as we get close to where she would be, I see her step in front of traffic, right? So I literally am like, because I'm expecting like, you know, the car she hit is gonna, you know, slam on the brakes, which is gonna chain reaction of cars. She's now hit. Like, I literally gasped very terribly as I grabbed onto the car, right? And as it's happening, we're passing this car. And so I'm looking, expecting to see a body, you know? Nothing. Complete. It was just spirit. It was this is what she did, and she killed herself back in the 70s. But to me, when they play it out for me, and they play it in that way where I can see it as clear as I see you, that's what happened. And so here I am, like, and you know, turning, and Dave's like, what, because he didn't experience it. And I tell him, and I'm like, oh, at first I'm like, oh, thank God it was a ghost. And I think that bothers him more when I do that. Because it's like clearly something happened and he has no idea what it was. And then I tell him, and he's like, I'm glad I don't see what you see. It's intense. It can be very intense. So yeah, that's one of the scary ones.
That's I Tracy, you know, from Blitzkid, we both had some together, even for that matter, just, you know, like all the long drives, you know, between, you know, his place and my place in that area. Like, it's the town he's from, Pocahontas, is even older than the town I'm from. Pocahontas, Virginia is one of the oldest like mining towns in Appalachia. You know, like there's a coal company called, well, I don't know if they're still around. They probably are. They were called Norfolk and Southern. It's like the conglomerate coal company down there. You know, they owned everything. Tracy's town is actually an old coal town, and all the magnates built it. So they built every house there. They built every building in the town, and owned it. They owned the town. Norfolk and Southern did. And the house that Tracy lived in, like, it was always interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but it was an old company house, and it was a dual house. So like his house is mirrored. It's on both sides. It's really weird. Like, if you go in his kitchen, the next thing you see is the same kitchen on the other side, because they've taken the wall down since they moved in. And then there's only one staircase now, but like there's a living room and a living room, and then there's a foyer and a foyer, staircase, bedroom, bathroom. It's all mirrored up there. But that whole town is something else. It really is. The cemetery there is a national landmark. They had a really, really bad explosion there. I forgot what year it was. It was Pocahontas Mine. You can look it up, Pocahontas Mine. And then it's an exhibition mine now where people can actually go on tours, and they take you through there, which is actually pretty interesting.
I like doing all those things. I like seeing those old mines and caves, and you know.
Oh yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's crazy. But that cemetery up there is really, really something else. It's wild. We've definitely felt a lot of things happening up there. The song that we have, "Let's Go to the Cemetery," and Blitzkid, that's about that song or that place, because that was kind of like, well, what are we gonna do? Let's go to the cemetery. Like, you know, that was kind of like, I guess, you know, autobiographical, or to a degree. Like, it was just, that was what we did, and we spent a lot of time up there. And there's a lot of weird stuff in the area. I have some pictures. I only have like 2 out of the many that we took up there, because we did some band photos at the early stages and all that. But I've got one. I don't have it here; it's back home. But it's like this weird misty. It's just like an oval, you know what I mean, kind of floating around. Which you look at the sky, it's like blue. So it's kind of like, it's not really mist. It's not the time of day
Yeah.
for it. But there's all kinds of weird stuff. He's had stuff happen at his house, I know, that we've talked about, and just in the area in general. It's so old, I mean, and all the mining deaths. That mine accident, it killed hundreds and hundreds of miners. It killed a good population of the workforce there, I guess. The whole area is interesting too, because there's a town across the hill called Bramwell, and at one point, that's where all the people, that's all the magnates lived. I didn't live there all the time. Like, some of them were from St. Louis or different parts of the world. But when they came to Virginia to, like, I guess, like, monitor everything, they had their own houses, and the houses are still over there. They're beautiful. They're old Victorian houses, turn of the century. Some of them have like these, like pools that are fed by the stream. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of like advances for that time in these houses, copper roofs. But the whole town boasted the largest. It was more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the United States at the time.
But
It was like,
I kept hearing the moment you started telling this story was just greed, greed, greed,
yeah.
greed,
Well,
greed.
there were million. I mean, there. I think there were like, I want to say at least 17 documented millionaires. You know what I mean? In the 1800s. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That were living in this town. And that whole, I mean, you go again, and a lot of it comes down to the coal industry too. There was a lot of downtrodden people because of that. The coal industries were not cool. You know what I mean? Like, it was indentured servitude.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those towns, I mean, like, they still exist mainly in an area called McDowell County. They're just vestige towns. There's nothing there. I mean, they were just towns for the coal companies, and there's nothing there. I mean, there's still people that live there, but there's no income, so they've fallen into disrepair. But I mean, a lot of people have heard of like the Mate 1 massacre that happened nearby us. That was when a lot of the workers who were, fed up basically with, the coal industry. They just, the train came into Mate 1 one day, and they were like, we had enough. A lot of the guys got off the train, a lot of the big wigs, and they shot them. And then they started sending like all the Pinkerton thugs down there, and there was a bunch of wars and coal wars. It's crazy. I mean, so there's a lot of like turmoil and bloodshed, and that's everywhere, but like, there's some places that you don't know, you know what I mean? Like, there's some places you ever been, like, I've been to places where people be like, oh, all these terrible things happen here. I'm like, really? That's crazy. But then there are places where, you just find out terrible things. You just know things happen.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is for me. So.
Yeah, and that is a good point. There's death is everywhere, right? And as much as we have stories in the United States that are old, and all these things have been going on for a long time. Europe obviously has more, right? Because that's longer history than the United States is. And it's funny because as you first started telling that story about the town and the people, the millionaires and stuff like that, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm sure those that watching probably did. I kept looking at like the top corner of the screen, so I kept looking in this direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was because as you were talking, I kept seeing this white like body like behind me that I could see on the screen. So it was kind of like a reflection of this solid white mass. And so I was like, wait, is that him? Like, because you have the Skype video is a little bit in the corner over there, but then I'm seeing it in the Skype video. So over here, I wasn't seeing it over here. So it was like really throwing me off. But this is the kind of stuff that happens to me all the time. But yeah, I mean, there's some places where, you wouldn't think it is going to be terrible, and it is. And there's places where you think it should be terrible, and it's not, And that's really where it comes down to 99% of the time, people are haunted, not places.
Right.
Some places there are exceptions where it's just terrible, like your hometown. It is terrible. The grounds are terrible. Tracy's area, terrible. Terrible. There's places, but then there's other places where, like my house, it was fine when I came for a walkthrough, and then within 3 months of me moving in, it was the floodgates open, and it just was like, next thing I know, like my ex-husband, who didn't believe in ghosts, military man, is running down the steps because he's terrified because something touched him. and he wanted to get out. Like, we have to leave, you know? And then once he's in a safe space, oh, no, that didn't happen. Well, no, that clearly did happen, you know? And at the time, I didn't understand it was because of me and my abilities, you know?
Yeah.
I have seen ghosts my entire life, but it was very fearful for me, so I shut it out, you know? This house made me embrace it because it's terrible. There's even a spot in my house that is a thinning between our world and other dimensions, other spirit world, whatever we want to call it, right? But it's not just the spirit world. It is truly other dimensions with elementals. And if I don't have my power symbol right where that thinning is, that room is terrifying. It gets bad real quick. And that's what happened when I moved into this house. That room, you'd walk in, whether you believed in ghosts or not, and every hair on your body stood up. You felt like you were being watched, like it was creepy. And it was an extra bedroom, so I just shut the door because I'm like, well, I don't use it, right? So I just shut the door, which made it worse. And then like, it was one of those like knobs that don't have locks or anything like that. It's just a plain doorknob.
Yep.
You could not open that door unless you knocked. You can try all you want for as long as you want. You're not getting in. But as soon as you just tap, knock, 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 turn the knob, the door opened up. It became a parlor trick in some ways. So but that room was terrifying for a very long time. And it wasn't until Jesus came through, and I think I told the story last week, and cleared out my house, including that room. And then I had asked, how do I do that? How do I, you know, clear spaces? And that's how I learned how to white light, you know, and how I teach people how to do it, and how I protect you, you know, especially when you're like, hey, can you put something around me? I feel off. Because, yeah, you usually are. So I'm glad you can reach out to me and ask me. So, yeah, it can get really terrible, and it can get terrible quick. And sometimes it is because of people. You know, we're sad. We're suffering. We hurt, you know. Unless you're dead, you should be always working on something and dealing with your sadness, you know. So, and even myself, you know, losing my son, it really sent ripples for me. And I understand now what most people go through when they lose somebody. Because prior to losing my son, and I had people die, you know, my grandparents I loved dearly, friends, you know, but I wasn't sad. You know, I saw them still, and I knew they were happy, and you know what I mean? So when other people lost people, sometimes probably I might come off a little cold because I'd be like, oh, well, they're happy, so, you know, it's okay. But then when I lost my son, it was like, oh, this is what people feel, you know? And this is terrible. And that sadness just gives spiritual entities energy to utilize. So places can become really bad really quickly, especially places like that.
And I find it interesting too that you know, in some cases, which I found really surprising, and we talked about it last week, I won't rehash it, but when I was at the Stanley Hotel and I had that encounter with you know, the ghost Lucy there, I mean, that was the complete like opposite, you know what I mean? Like for me, it was one of those situations where I was like overwhelmed with like a positive feeling, like a happiness. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of weird. Like I guess it was not concerning, but you know, it was almost obsessive in a way. Like I was just like, I have to find out more. And I don't know if it's just because the situation was so real. But it's interesting how that can work too. Do you know what I mean? Like it makes me wonder sometimes how, you know, it just depends if it's the person and the spirit and the energy that they had or whatever. But
it's definitely both. It's definitely both, right? Because some people will, so for myself, if I want to go to the Stanley Hotel, as I said on our last session, and for me, like I would go into it like, okay, I'm ready to experience stuff. Like this is gonna be cool. I'm not afraid of it. You know, I'm okay with it. Anybody wants to talk to me, they can talk to me, you know, but when I go to sleep, you're not allowed to talk to me. Like I put my rules and all that stuff up. So some of that is the excitement to experience something different, to, you know, witness that kind of stuff. And then other stuff is like really how the spirits are, and if they're cranky that day, or if they're cranky in general, or if they're providing like okay, I like you, so I want to talk to you, I want to interact with you, I want to be near you, right? And so then that will feed into that more curiosity too, because it's not oppressive. It's more of like, hey, you're feeling her curiosity about you, and you're feeling hers, and so you feed off each other, especially people with a sensitivity like yourself. We can sense things differently and feel things differently. Where somebody else will go to that place ready to fight. Like I could see Dave ready to fight. I can.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, when I first met him and stuff like that, well before we started dating, we worked together, and he was doing some paperwork at the desk at the end of the night. I was finishing up some faxing and things like that to the billing company. And I turned, and as I turned and faced him, which his back would be to me, a spirit passed through him, right? And I didn't say anything, right? The spirit comes passing through him. I see the mist, the haze come through. And he shuddered, And I was like, do you know why you just did that? He's like, no. I'm like, well, ghost just passed through you, right? And he's like, next thing I know, he takes his hands and he starts air punching behind him.
That sounds like a Dave move, man.
Oh, I started cracking up laughing. I'm like, okay, because that's going to hurt them, but okay.
Put him up. Put him up.
Yeah, he's just doing one of these, picking up the air behind them. So people's energy will influence and engage or deflect, that spiritual activity as well. Somebody who's completely terrified of them, well, one of two things will happen. They'll be terrified because the spirits are constantly coming at them, or they're so terrified that they block it, and they don't experience a single thing, but it can go either way. It doesn't necessarily go the positive way. And then you have the people that desperately want to experience their family or experience a spirit, and they'll never experience it because they're trying so hard to feel that when it's just energy. And if you can't feel energy, it's going to be difficult, so it can go many, many ways. But yeah, that's why I don't get the chance to talk too many ghost stories because not a lot of people I know like to talk about them, their experiences, if they had any, you know what I mean, in fear of what does that mean, is that going to create more, is it going to, you know what I mean, so I enjoy when I can talk ghost stories to people. So
yeah, no, definitely. I appreciate you having me on.
No, I appreciate you being here, and I know we're right at our time here, so we're going to try and stay a long time.
Okay.
But yeah, I appreciate you coming back on, and maybe we could do this around Halloween, and maybe do it like in the evening, so like we can instead of it being you and I live at that moment, we can pre-record it at like a nighttime kind of thing, and then I can play it during the daytime, or both. We go live on both of them, so where I do the one at night, we do it live, and then I repost it the next day, or whatever day for the normal scheduled live stream. So those that are watching, just tell me what you want. Tell me if you want us to do it at night and do a live stream then, or if you want and then repost it during a normal time, or does it not matter? Because I know for me it doesn't matter. Halloween, yeah. Halloween's fun for me because it's Halloween, so people think it's like kind of kitschy and stuff like that, and it's just Halloween. But a lot of our holidays are based upon pagan rituals, which there's a lot there. Fall solstice, winter solstice, all of that, and that was always about spiritual activity. So yeah, it'll be fun.
I'm down. Just let me.
Yeah. But I appreciate you coming on and talking with everybody again. And anytime. Oh, real quick. So tell us what's new. I meant to do this a little earlier, but what's new with the band? What are we doing? I know COVID's put a squash. A lot of people want to know about the Jason show.
Yeah. So, live, not much is happening. We're supposed to be going out in October, and everyone's been asking us if that's still happening. We're going to make an official announcement, this weekend that everything's being pushed until May.
Okay.
No surprise there. There's just too many travel restrictions and variances between, state policies in order to make a cohesive U.S. tour for 30 days across the United States. Impossible. So, from the live standpoint, everything's on hiatus. There's a lot happening. It's just not happening right now. for me, I'm just finishing up a score that I'm working on. Should have it done relatively soon. It would have been done and ready for the show, the tour that was happening in October. But so I'll have that done soon. I'm writing a score for the old 1922 Nosferatu silent movie.
Awesome.
A friend of mine had a first generation print of it, that came from Germany whenever it was supposedly destroyed. Long story there, but it had no music, so I just put some music to it, and we're working on that right now. And then my goal is to start putting out another album, just rock music album, I guess.
Awesome. All right. I know everybody that's out there that already knows your music and is a fan. They're excited. I'm excited. I can't wait. Can't wait for the movie thing too, because I know you were originally going to be doing a showing, and that got canceled, right? Because
that was supposed to fall in conjunction with the date we were playing in New Jersey. So we would have had the concert, and then at the theater down the road, we were going to do a screening premiere of the movie with the score and all that stuff. So, we'll still do that next year. It won't be a premiere, but we'll still do a showing of it for sure.
Awesome. Well, Dave and I will be there. So you just once it's all there locally, we find you. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.
Message me anytime you're having a problem.
I will.
All right, thanks. Bye.
See you later.